Jurassic World Rebirth is a science fiction thriller in the Jurassic Park franchise. It's the 7th film installment. This movie sees us return to an island, a third, in which we encounter more or less an island of prototypes that didn't make the cut in the debut opening of Jurassic World. While they have been left to their own devices, many have thrived in this isolation, building up enormous and highly successful populations. Life found a way. The same cannot be said of the dinosaurs on the mainland. Many failed to maintain populations in more populated or colder environments. Our team of protagonists have gone to the island with ambitions of collecting samples from large dinosaurs. As many large animals have resilience to numerous diseases and conditions, it makes sense for how they might have implications for disease research. I'll leave the plausibility of this to folks with more education on the relevant subjects, but it's certainly not the worst pitch I've heard, and it sends our heroes with reason to engage with a number of large and dangerous animals, getting straight into the action. I'm going to be jumping right into spoil territory here, so just know that going forward. The characters were definitely a high point. Their acting, writing, and motivations were all top-notch. A lot of familiar archetypes, but they were fresh and engaging. Nothing terribly complex, but they each had solid and consistent motivations. The guards weren't just sinister, trigger-happy mercenaries, the scientist wasn't just spouting off facts to keep the audience informed, kid characters weren't annoying and just there to cause problems and raise stakes, and so forth. The bad guy wasn't complicated, but he didn't have to be, and only did evil things in line with his motivations, not just for the thrill of the sinister. Duncan, Zora, and Henry were all amazing protagonists, and I loved every minute of their screen time. The sequences the characters were in might not have been terribly original, indeed, a lot of them were lifted directly from the books and previous films, but the motivations and characters themselves did a lot in keeping me interested. I hope any subsequent installments in this franchise are like this. Build new and engaging characters for your story. Independent stories in the same setting make this feel a lot stronger than it would have if we just brought back cast members from the other two trilogies. I loved these characters within minutes, and that investment made the trials they endured all the more impactful. Character work was an absolute strength of this film. As I mentioned in my trailer review of this film, I think the idea of GMO dinosaurs from a hotter planet bred to thrive on a tropical island doing poorly on most of the mainland makes all kinds of sense. Not as a retcon of their initial success in Dominion, but that they might not have endurance and stability long term. Pursuant to my own project, most animals brought to Chimere don't have lasting populations. Only a few species manage to establish themselves from each harvest. For an example of short versus long-term success, sauropods might be large enough to endure the cold of modern Canada and have sufficient forest to feed upon, but if their eggs and young freeze to death over winter, that won't make for a lasting population. That's not to say no dinosaurs will manage to adapt to this new context, and I admit it did feel like things went poorly for them outside the tropics a bit too fast and without as much nuance I would like, but perhaps for the sake of narrative they had to give us a quick and clean explanation. I think it's entirely realistic that a majority would not thrive in the long run. Then again, I thought the locust plot of Dominion was the best concept in the whole Jurassic World trilogy, so I appreciate not a lot of you will come along with me on these points. However, on this and other tropical islands with ample food and minimal humans, the idea of dinosaurs doing here makes much more sense to me. Again, these aren't wild animals cloned with precision. They were modified to have temperament and metabolism that would do well in a tropical theme park on an island. Going feral in basically the same context they were made for seems pretty reasonable premise to me. Having so many of the dinosaurs of insane dimensions did consistently bother me. Yes, you could argue it's not intended to be literal, instead representing how the characters perceive them, but this is a visual medium with a lot of realism at the forefront, so it's hard to not take it literally. I think you'd be better off using camera angles to emphasize how imposing they are, which, I will say, as I'll get into later, they often did. Something the first film did quite efficiently as well. They did just that in quite a few shots, but I still think the Titanosaurs and Mosasaur blew past any suspension of disbelief in terms of scale. I was a bit worried when I saw how fast this was written and made. I don't mean this as an insult, but having now seen it, I'm no longer surprised. There were so many familiar scenes, it felt like they just had to fill in the gaps, and the most original stuff was in the character work. This isn't really a knock on the writing. A complex story can often be a weakness. Dominion, for example, was a movie that had some strengths, but the plot felt all over the place in that film. Having a tight, simple story in basically one location made this a stronger film than if it had tried to be more than it was. Say what you will about the Jurassic World trilogy, and there's a lot I could say, especially about the last two that didn't land for me, but they did try new things. They weren't beholden to the formula. This film was much more enjoyable to me than those other Jurassic World films, but I have to acknowledge that it played extremely safe in a lot of ways. There's really nothing new here. Really, the only new aspects were the basic plot and the characters. New ground need not always be broken. Sometimes it's fine to just be a solid B movie, which is what I think this is, but I don't love what it says that I liked this formulaic highlights reel than the messier yet bolder films. I think Fallen Kingdom is the most original of any Jurassic Park sequel, yet I find it barely watchable. Ending I find profoundly stupid, and it is by far my least favorite installment in the franchise. Given the reception of these last two sequels, I do wonder and worry a bit if this one erupts in money and praise, if it's the end of the franchise trying anything new. That would be unfortunate, although, quite frankly, I doubt it. I think this might set a new foundation, and then they'll experiment more as time goes on. This is back to basics. It's solid and fun. Nothing wrong with that, and I wouldn't be surprised if the next installments take more risks. The dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals were fantastic across the board. I would have loved to see more puppets, but honestly, the CGI looked incredible. The composition of shots so often emphasized their wonder and imposing scale. A lot of intimate shots also made them grounded. It would be impossible for me to pick a favorite depiction. The Spinosaurus pack had such a tense and menacing sequence. They looked amazing, and I've already gotten some great conversations with friends and acquaintances about this animal's depictions and its implications for what we know and the debates surrounding it. I know a lot of people didn't like the Spinosaurus, especially in its early appearance in the trailers, but I've pretty much enjoyed them across the board more and more as it goes, and the movie definitely delivers on the final product. The Mosasaurus was such an improvement on the previous design. Yes, it still has armor, but it gives far more lizard than croc. I don't love its rorquals, but you only get a brief glimpse of them. Whatever. Okay, I also don't love how tubby it looks when it's breaching. I think it just would be best if it stayed mostly submerged. A barely perceptible sea serpent. That's when the Mosasaurus is at its strongest. Everyone's been gushing about the T-Rex sequence, and god damn is the hype justified. All my reservations about the Quetzalcoatlus? Gone. This thing looks perfectly horrid, and it was great to see it crawling around and swallowing a person whole. Its quills, coloration, sound design, all of it flawless. An animal I'm about to get into wasn't evil in a way that I appreciated. The Quetzalcoatlus, however, this was a hateful animal. They did raid its nest, which does raise a question I had about them going on and on and on and on and on about needing live blood samples, but whatever. So, its launching an infernal assault on these characters was justified, but man, This was one evil bird. I loved it. I also appreciated how many weird little critters there were. Neuronathids flittering about, temnospondyls in the trees, all helped flesh out this prehistoric, primordial environment. It was also cool that there were several points where something moved in the jungle or water and you just had no idea what it was. Ask anyone who's been hiking in dense foliage off trail can tell you it's shocking how limited your visibility can be. This made for a super immersive quality. Get that we dinosaur fans like to see and identify everything, but I think it's cool that there were so many points where you are just left wondering. The unknown can be the most frightening thing in this world. Having something massive and invisible moving just past you in broad daylight? Horrifying. I do wonder if the lack of a consistent antagonist dinosaur contributes to the film feeling a bit incoherent at points, but I do appreciate the intentional emphasis on these being animals, not monsters. This may result in a weaker narrative, but a stronger depiction of dinosaurs as animals. I have polarized opinions on the hybrids. My thoughts on the D-Rex? Quite positive, with really my only exception being its size appearing extremely exaggerated in a few of the initial shots, but when it was attacking the bad guy, it seemed like its skull was comparable in size to a T-Rex. As far as themes go, I feel like it accomplished what the Indominus and Indoraptor were trying to do, yet with like 5% of the screen time. It was a horrible mistake of a creature. However, it still acted like a big, curious, clumsy animal. It wasn't malevolent, just hungry and curious. I think it landed all these concepts quite well. The Mutodons, however, yeah, these should have been raptors. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense, InGen making dragons when they feared dinosaurs were losing their popularity. Entirely reasonable. I liked the design, and they moved and sounded fantastic. Maybe if they had been raptors, the gas station sequence would have felt too obviously derivative. I don't know, but I still think a kick-ass raptor design would have been far stronger. Also, if they had been feathered, we could have been left with the assumption that the park chose to stick to their original brand instead of being realistic, all because they wanted their audience to take them seriously. A fun little commentary on the franchise itself. Then having feathered raptors doing all the same things the Mutodons did would have been excellent. I can't say that they were bad and the Mutodons did fit the setting, I just fucking hated them on an entirely subjective personal level. To close out, I love the final decision Zora makes and the message it brings. Science isn't what went too far. People did. Capitalism and greed did. They chose to go the route of the polio vaccine, and I think that's some heartwarming shit right there. For a movie that has so much apathy and cynicism as a recurring undertone, this was a lovely note to end on. So in all, I quite liked Jurassic World Rebirth. It's a B movie with an insane budget. I think it felt a bit too derivative for me to give any kind of enthusiastic, glowing endorsement of quality writing. At the end of the day, this is a highlights reel of the franchise held together by some really strong characters, but hey, it worked. I really enjoyed it. I want this franchise to have room to try new things, to get messy even if it doesn't always land. I don't want Jurassic to always play it safe going forward. However, there's something to be said for going back to basics, and at this, Jurassic World Rebirth is an enjoyable adventure well worth your time. Thank you all, have a wonderful day. Cheers, folks!